Hey everyone, it's Natalie, and I just had a few quick updates before we get to the meat of the episode and all the tolerating that we do here on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. So, I hope that you've heard that we have a Patreon, and now we have added a goal to get 25 Patreon members supporting the show. Once that happens, I have some cool perks planned out to release. Spoiler alert, one of them is a pen pal program because I love mail and I love putting stickers on envelopes. So head to the link in the show notes, head to the Patreon, and consider joining us and all the fun we could be having. Also, every Tuesday on Instagram Live at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, we are partnering with Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous to bring you Still Comfy with Jules and Nat. It's a show where we're looking at our comfort TV shows and movies to see if they still make us feel warm and gooey on the inside. So check it out. And I can't wait to see you, whether it's on Patreon, Instagram, or in the DMs. Love you all. Thanks for being here. Hey Tolerators, this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, the show where my guests and I explore everyday misogyny and the way it seeps into our media. Today's guest is, honestly, I didn't even tell you this, John, when you logged on, but you're getting me like scary movie cred because of Malignant. Like people are like, you're hanging out with someone who was in Malignant. I go, yeah, and that movie was wild.
It sure was.
So we'll have to talk about that one time. But Jon Lee Brody has done so many things. He acts, he produces, he directs, he hosts Real Psychology on Fireside, which is how we connected. But then there's also, he's an X-Men fan. He can quote specific episodes of Boy Meets World. And he creates nerdy content like Virtual Catan on the YouTube channel Geghead, which means that I was sold because all I've been doing is playing Catan on my Switch by myself. Like a true cool person.
Where's the lie?
Yeah. So he's here to help us digest the idea of, is there really enough when it comes to making sure media is diverse, or your company, or anything like that? So thanks for being here, John.
Thank you for having me, Natalie. It's my pleasure. And that's quite the intro, because I know like in our kind of pre-talk before we came on, you just like asked me like, and I'm not great at talking about myself. I said, I do have a bio I've used, but whatever you come up with is great. And clearly my prediction came to fruition because that was a great intro.
Well, thank you so much. Did you see at Comic-Con that they announced that I've been correct for years and X-Men works better as a series? So they're going to reboot the X-Men 97 series?
Oh, yeah. Eric and Julia Lawald are two very dear friends of mine who created X-Men 92. And they were brought on a little later in the process, but I was so happy they were. When I heard, you hear rumors, you never know what to believe. But then when they were announced and I verified it with Julia, I said, oh my God, this is happening. And a little fun fact for you. I don't know if I ever told you this off the record, but years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I approached Eric and Julia because the anniversary of X-Men 92 was coming up. And I said, I would love to do a documentary and do a retrospect of X-Men 92. And it was coming off the heel, or is in anticipation of their book coming out previously on X-Men, which I'm sure you're a proud owner of. If you're not, I highly recommend it because it's like original storyboards and stuff from the original X-Men series. And I said, this is a great story. And I found that at that point, it has since changed because of Comic-Con, but they had never met the voice cast at that point. They had never met Kyle Dodd. They had never met Lenore Zand. They had never met Allison Court. They never met any of these wonderful people that brought life to these awesome characters. And I said, well, there's our story. They're all Toronto based. Let's do the story here. We all travel there, have some sort of event, maybe tied into Fan Expo at Toronto, all this stuff. And let's do a live table read with the cast of Night of the Sentinels to give everyone a true treat of, this pilot that really changed animation.
Yeah.
Or, forever. And all credit as well to Margaret Lesh, who was the executive at Fox Kids at the time, who, at the risk of her own job, put that show on the air. She was
Mm-hmm.
told by her bosses, if you put this on the air, you won't have a job on Monday. She said, you can go ahead and fire me. Obviously, as history shows, that wasn't the case because the that cartoon and also the Batman animated series were huge phenomenons. But and to make a long story short, I had this whole plan, but then a number of things ended up happening, not least of which Marvel/Disney not really being on board, and then there's confusion in terms of who owns what because the Disney mergers and everything going on.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, that project never happened. But Eric and Julia still remain really dear friends of me to this day, and I'm just so happy that they can go full circle and really truly be recognized in an age where an even broader audience can know what they do because of social media and different media coverage. And I'm just so happy for them. And then as a fan, I can't wait to see X-Men 97.
Yeah. I love that story, mostly because my dad grew up in his grandpa's comic store. Well, in my grandpa's comic book store, and then going to conventions. So he was a big fan of the graphic novel series ElfQuest. And so he got to like hang out with Richard and Wendy Penn. I think I'm pronouncing that one right. And at conventions and stuff. And he would, and he still talks to it to this day when I make fun of him for letting me read ElfQuest at a very young age because there's some MA content in there. And I'm like, Dad, you handed this to me when I was 6. And he's like, you liked it? It's like, okay. All right. I'm going to hand it to my friends and be like, will you hand this to your 6-year-old? And I'm going to see what they say. But everyone on this podcast knows that I was wildly unsupervised. But, so I want to get into something that you told me about on our offline, call. And it was I believe that you used the word that when you're involved with a project or you're on set, you're considered difficult. And I wanted to explore that because I believe that now in my personal life, not really my professional life anymore, but in my personal life, I've become that difficult friend who will say the thing that everyone's tiptoeing around or ask the question like, did anyone consider how this would affect X, Y, and Z or things like that? Could you talk a little bit on what difficult on set means for you and why that happens in your job environment?
Sure. And just for any kind of clarification, I have been deemed, quote, difficult by multiple sources on set. That hasn't really happened. Usually
Okay,
on set,
awesome.
when you're no, it's all good. When you're boots on the ground, usually people that are boots on the ground, really the ones doing the work,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to understand what you're trying to do. I always try to come from a place of respect. I played team sports growing up. And even if you're the top dog, number one on the call sheet, whatever, there's a responsibility that comes with that, and always just, lead by example, but also treat others with respect. But there's been instances where I was on a pilot. I'll just give one story, just to kind of help kind of convey the whole point of being deemed difficult and how
Yeah.
where that can come from and where that narrative can be perpetuated. But in 2017, I was hired to direct and produce this pilot. It was I don't want to say the name because I think there's some ongoing lawsuits going on with it. It was a really cool concept with someone who I considered a friend at the time, that was going to be producing, which I had a little bit of reluctance because this individual did not have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
experience, even though I did. But I knew I was there and I knew what I could bring to the table. I knew we'd be fine. Not to toot my own horn, I just knew we'd be fine. I knew I could hire a crew that would be very capable of capturing what we needed. Within the first day, I saw all sorts of problems, not least of which was the treatment of the women on set.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had a lot of female crew in the camera department and all across the board because, like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or look like a savior. It's just not the case. I just like to give an equal opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to anyone of any background as long as they're capable of doing the job. That's really important. And yeah, if I'm going to be people say you should always give it to who's best for the job, and I said that's true. But if I'm on the bubble between someone of color and someone who maybe hasn't had a chance, but I see has the skill set, and someone who's not of color and maybe has a little more experience, I'm going with a new person because I
Mm-hmm.
know they can do it, and somebody needs to give them a chance. And no one has to agree with me with that. That's totally fine. That you can do it your own way. on your set, but that's the way I like to do it if I ever have a choice to do so. But me speaking up about it was a huge thing with them. And the moment I did that, the next 4 days were complete hell for me.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to sabotage everything I was doing. They were undermining everything I was doing. They were trying to cut me out of stuff. I saw what they were doing, and what they were doing was they were trying to get me to quit.
Mm.
Because here's the thing for any aspiring filmmakers who may encounter something similar, if you quit, you're not necessarily entitled to your salary that you're promised. That's why you don't really want to quit your job. If you're let go of even a corporate job, you can file for unemployment and stuff like that. But if you end up quitting, that's a whole other mess, and it's a little harder to have really have your legal stuff in line
Mm-hmm.
with those sorts of things. So I knew what they were trying to do, but they didn't realize the kind of upbringing I had. I grew up a lot harder than people probably realize, and saw stuff and had to be exposed to stuff that that I really shouldn't have been exposed to as a young kid. But that also gave me this really thick skin, even though I'm maybe not in your face about it, because I just don't feel the need to be, to throw it in people's faces. So over the next 4 days, they tried everything they could do. Nothing rattled me. I still delivered. My crew knew what was going on. And my deal was for the first 2 episodes. I was gonna direct the pilot and do episode 2. And on day 1 of episode 2, we do the whole thing. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe we settled our differences. I'm gonna crush this thing. I'm gonna do what
Mm-hmm.
I do. I come here to do the work. I don't come here for drama. I come here to do the work. After day 1 of episode 2, I was told that I was being let go and that they're going a different direction. And funny enough, me not wanting to quit because at the time I really needed the money. I wasn't, not that I'm rolling in the Benjamins now, but back then I especially needed the money that was going to come from this. They ended up not paying me anyway. And what they tried to do was not pay me for episode 2 as well, because they're saying, "Oh, well, we let you go during episode 2." I'm like, "Well, it doesn't. If I work one day or all days, my directorial fee was X amount of dollars. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like that's a flat rate. And if I worked one day on episode 2, you owe me money." I never saw that money. Never really saw that. I saw like half of my rate from episode 1, and that was it. But it was all. It wasn't because I wasn't up for the task. It was because I stood up for the female crew. And both of those female, two of those females ended up quitting anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Once they found out I was gone, they were kind of like, "Well, after this, we're not going to do it." And that's just one instance where I've done that. And there's people that are in charge a lot of times, especially in the entertainment industry, are people that, am I allowed to cuss on your podcast?
Of course. All the
Okay.
time. It's about misogyny.
Yeah.
Goddamn.
A lot of these, this is going to parlay into a lot of different sort of conversations. That's just kind of the risk you take with talking to me and asking a question. Sometimes I monologue and it goes into different subject matters. But in this particular instance, it was a man who didn't know what the fuck he was doing,
Mm-hmm.
and his way of overcompensating for that is to bark orders at people and try to flex his muscle, like I'm
Yeah.
the one in charge. And anyone who has to do that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. It's a shame, because if he would have discreetly told me like, "Hey, I'm not sure about this," I'm like, look, I would have had his back and said,
Mm-hmm.
"No one will know that you don't know what's going on. And
Right.
I will give you all the credit in the world. That's my job too. My job is to make sure everybody looks good and
Mm-hmm.
whenever possible." But that wasn't the case here, and that just happens. You have people who don't know what they're doing, and they're feeling overwhelmed, so they have to find somebody to throw under the bus. And usually it's someone who's, I'm pretty soft spoken. Yeah, I can be outspoken at times when it comes to certain issues, but I'm not one to be in your face about stuff.
Right.
And usually that makes you a target for these really insecure individuals,
Mm-hmm.
these very insecure, misogynistic, no talent motherfuckers who don't know
Yeah.
what the fuck they're doing. And that was the case here. It's been the case many times over my life, not just my entertainment career. It happened growing up playing sports, or that's just one particular story. So yeah, I've been, a lot of times when you do that, you're deemed, quote, difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That's their way of justifying it. "No, he's difficult. He was trying to cause trouble." I'm like, "No, I wasn't. I was, what I was bringing up is something that should be entry level respect on your end. You treat people right, and you don't call women sweetheart on set. You don't talk down to them the way you talk down to them." And a lot of that does come from my own upbringing. My dad was a pretty abusive fellow, and as a kid you felt so helpless, and there was definitely a complex, and I've talked about it with my therapist many times in terms of why I take on this whole. I feel like I have this responsibility to
Mhm.
be like some sort of protector because I felt like I couldn't protect my mom when I was younger,
Yeah.
which I've learned to come to terms with, but it certainly stems from that. And I've seen these injustices up close in my personal life, but most definitely in my professional life. And I would just hope that people, if they've seen stuff, would know, one, you can speak up.
Mhm.
There may be a price to pay for it, but I don't think that price is worse than what it would be if you said nothing, because doing
Right.
nothing also has consequences.
I lost a job in a similar situation. It was my last teaching job before I pivoted into theater administration. And I was on the leadership committee, like they signed up for this, and we were sitting at a table and they were trying to implement some sort of policy that I knew would be detrimental for our lower income students. And it was a school where we had more lower income families than not. And we were very aware of that. And I said that. I was like, we talk a lot in these meetings about how we're always doing the best that we can for these kids. I go, but why don't we ever talk about working with what these kids have, working with the background that they're coming from, actually involving their parents and things like that? And they looked at me and they were like, what? I go, it just feels like a lot of the time you are asking me to impart my very privileged white upbringing onto these kids and ask them to act the exact same way I would have in fourth grade. And it was right around contracts were going to come out. And I got my email that I wasn't getting my contract renewed. And then I got another email that said that not only was I not getting my contract reviewed, but I also had to submit a resignation letter. And I was like, or they were going to withhold my summer pay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry you had to deal with that, and thank you for sharing that story with me and also your listeners. And that's bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
And I looked, so it was me, and then it was three other white women, and then our dean of students was an African American gentleman. And I looked at him and I went, am I wrong? And he went, I've had this battle before. And he kind of just like, he's like, we'll talk about it after this, but I've fought this fought before. And then he went into what he has brought to the table before. And it was just this really icky confrontation where I was trying to be respectful, but I was also trying to do what I thought was best for my kids. And there was no winning at the end of the day. And I know that those people go to bed every night thinking that they're doing the best that they can for these kids. And it's just emotionally and mentally abusive at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a strange thing because as individuals and as human beings, that all we can really do is our best. But there's a fine line. There's that needs to come with an understanding, because oftentimes we think we're doing something in the best interest of somebody
Mm-hmm.
else, but it's really, like, to your point, your previous point, a lot of times what you're doing is imparting, or almost like insisting on what you would do, and saying that these someone else should do what you do because that's what worked for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just never the case. My industry, like, I'm someone who started acting, but now that I'm more on the directing side, that's more my passions are. I know what my process is as an actor. I know what I would need to do to get somewhere, but that doesn't mean that this person I'm working with is going to have the same process. You got to be
Right.
respectful of what they're going to do, but that's where just communication needs to come in, and you're like, okay, this is the goal here. I never even tell actors this is what I would do. I just let them know what the circumstances are, and then I say, what questions do you have for me? And I think, me growing up with a mix of really great teachers and some really bad ones, if I
Mm-hmm.
don't mind saying so, who, I think I would have preferred, and this is why I love Boy Meets World, because there's an episode, I think it's season 3, where Mr. Turner finally admits, like, Corey and Sean, because they're like, oh, I'm just trying to figure out as I go. And Mr. Turner says, well, us adults are too.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have had more of that. The teachers I had, for the most part, they were trying to maintain some sort of, I get maintaining authority, knowing that there
Hmm.
should be a respect factor there. I'm a believer in that, but they were trying to not be human to us.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me to say that in retrospect with the lens of now and the maturity of now. Back then, I wouldn't have known any better. I probably would have thought that, but just couldn't articulate it in words. But I just feel like even if you're someone who's an authority figure, parent, teacher, coach, I think it's okay to let your students, your athletes, or your pupils, whoever, let them know that sometimes you don't have the answer.
Hmm.
That you are human underneath that. And I think, and I certainly do that as well. And I'd be like, look, I know what I know, and if you ask me a question and it falls in the wheelhouse of what I know, I'll give you an answer. But if I don't know, I'm going to straight up tell you I don't know, which is a personal growth thing on my part. Because before, I used to be so concerned about looking inferior. Because look, real talk, as a man, as an Asian American man, in a white man's world
Yeah.
where it's a white man's narrative, it's not enough if I'm good at a certain task, whether it's sports or filmmaking. It's just not. It's not good enough. It's not enough if I'm talented, I have the skill set. There's a whole other hurdle that I have to clear that someone who is not a person of color wouldn't have to clear, or someone in, let alone like a female person,
Hmm.
of color.
Right.
And so I that's the burden that we're just born with.
Hmm.
It's unfortunate, but at the same time, you know, I just make sure that I leave no stone unturned, because they're always looking, they being usually the people in charge, always looking for a way to not hire me, which for the most part they've been able to do, because the studio machine is what it is. But once they see it up close, they can't deny it.
Yeah.
And they keep on trying to find things I can't do. But what I did in between not having work is learning how to do everything else as much as I could. Just so, I try to be like what's that band, Loveroo, in 2009, Bulletproof.
Oh,
That's what
maybe.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to that's what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be bulletproof. I guess I should have just said Superman, but
Yeah.
I was trying to go for a more vague and kind of obscure reference like Ted Lasso would.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I say it often, and I say it every time I'm in the position that this is happening, where I'm just like, I would just like to wake up one day and my entire fate of that day or my job or where my career is going or my bodily autonomy isn't just at the whim of a white man and how he's feeling in that moment and whether or not he's insecure or happy or pissed off at me or, trying to get money for votes or anything like that. Just to wake up one day and be like, today I get to do it all and none of that outside bullshit will affect me.
Yeah, I mean that's a good mentality to have, and there's just things that are going to be out of our control, unfortunately, and it really is on us as individuals at the ground level to really take it upon ourselves to not become one of those assholes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's individuals, for whatever reason, they will, and I'm talking particularly about entertainment, but this can be applied to other areas of life as well. But in entertainment, there's people who will do anything, and I mean anything, to be A-list, to be a celebrity, to be famous, even if that means compromising their own moral compass,
Hmm.
compromising their own integrity, even if that means screwing over their friend and stepping on others to try to get ahead, which I've had people do to me. Yeah, I helped this filmmaker who didn't know what the fuck he was doing. You're noticing a pattern here. I tend to work with people who don't know what they're doing. And I was kind of the de facto director or producer of this thing, but I was brought on because they knew they could throw me under the bus if anything
Hmm.
went wrong, and which is what they did. But if it wasn't for me, that movie wouldn't have gotten done. It wouldn't have looked like the way it did. But there, and again, I can't mention the name of this one either because there's a lawsuit with this
Yeah.
one, going on. But it's just unfortunate that that's what people will do. They'll do anything to get there, and then they'll do anything to stay there. And
Hmm.
I'm seeing it happen in real time. I've seen it happen in real time many times, and and I'll admit, when I first started, I strive for that because I was very much seeking that external validation. I really wanted that praise, But I think anyone who has that, and I feel like anyone is there, stop. I would always say stop and ask yourself why, which I
Hmm.
didn't do for so many years. I said, why is it so important that I would that to be liked by this group that clearly doesn't want anything to do with me? And this goes back to when I was a kid, because being like a token Asian in white suburbia, I know I look different than everybody else, and I
Hmm.
know that may scare people off. So I always felt like I had to win people over.
Yeah.
And it's not until you get to your adult years. And for me, this happened pretty recently, mostly during quarantine, when the only thing we had to do was either play Xbox or take a good look of ourselves in the mirror and really self evaluate, which is what I took upon myself to do. And I just was like, why is this so important to me? And then I realized it's not. Like, it ain't
Hmm.
that deep. All that stuff, none of that lasts forever. It,
No.
it really doesn't. And those accolades and those material goods you get, they're fun while you're here, but once you leave this earth, you don't get to take them with you.
Right.
And that's something that I definitely keep in mind. That doesn't, I'm not as driven by money anymore, but I have an understanding that it takes money to do certain things like pay
Hmm.
rent and
Yeah.
keep the lights on and make sure my dog has good food. But at the end of the day, it's like in Fight Club when, well, they're both, man, not to give away the twist here, but Brad Pitt says to Ed Norton, things you own end up owning
Right.
you. And I think it's just, I think it's important to just kind of recognize that. I don't think anything's more important than just treating your fellow human being with respect. You don't have to be friends with everybody. No, you don't have to have you don't have to be having dinner parties with everybody, nothing like that. But
Yeah.
I think at the entry level, giving respect is something I'll always do. If I don't get it in return, then I just make a note of it. It's like in that book, The Untethered Soul.
Yeah.
That circumstance isn't necessarily a complete reflect like indication of what's going on. It's just you're being hyper aware of this is what's going on. Make note of it, move on.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try to do. As I turned 39 in January, so I'm not too far off from 40. So as I'm approaching the F ages, I want to go in with a more even keel,
Hmm.
level-minded mindset and just a better understanding, mostly of myself, because a lot of times we neglect ourselves. It's easy to. We talked about this on this week on the podcast, Dana and myself, on Real Psychology, where the things closest to us, like our own psyche, our own health, should be the stuff we know best, but it's oftentimes the opposite.
Right.
It's a lot easier to externalize and help others out because you can always walk away from that situation, but you can't
Hmm.
walk away from yourself.
Right.
And at some point, you got to stop running and just uh, look. This might be a hot take because I don't know how people feel about him, but like Michael Jackson said, start with a man in the mirror, man, woman.
Right.
Start with the person in the mirror. Let me be.
I think what happens when it comes to people and their like automatic block against having those really hard conversations, and I talked about it this week on this Instagram live stream, Still Comfy, that I do on Tuesdays about One Tree Hill, where it's, you ask the tough question like, hey, why is One Tree Hill such a very white cast? And it's not until season 4 or 5 that Skills gets to be an actual member of the cast who's on every episode. That a lot of people in the room immediately put up this wall like, well, why do we have to talk about it?
Mhm.
Or like, why is that something that we have to care about? And it's the most fragile question in the world. But it is the question that I got when we were going to cover the Elvis movie for Still Comfy. And I, at 33 years old, had to grapple with the fact that I love the Lilo and Stitch soundtrack. It is part of my self-care routine. But Elvis also stole a good chunk of his music from B.B. King and Big Mama Thornton. And Jules and I, she's my co-host and co-creator of Still Comfy, and she does the Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous podcast. She talked about what it was like with her growing up, that she knew that those were BB King songs, and she knew BB King's catalog of music. And then to watch this movie and realize that Elvis got to be the king of rock and roll and BB King didn't, grappling with that. But when I would talk to people in the Midwest in my family and I go, oh yeah, we're going to do Elvis and we're going to talk, about cultural appropriation, the age gap between him and Priscilla, people in my life immediately screamed at me, Elvis was a very nice man, and he paved the way for everyone to write rock and roll songs. And I'm like, okay.
Except that he didn't write any of his own songs.
Except for he didn't write any of his own songs.
With all respect to Elvis as an entertainer, he's an icon.
Yeah.
I can't deny that. But look, Hollywood.
This is Natalie Katona, host of the podcast To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. Are you a business owner that would like to start advertising on podcasts and want to work one-on-one with the podcast host to craft the perfect message for your business on an episode? Well, you're in luck. I'm a one-woman operation, and I have ad space open on future episodes of To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. If you are interested in learning more about booking an ad with our show, please email me at menI'veTolerated.before@gmail.com. Thanks, and I can't wait for our future collaborations.
Hollywood loves a white savior story or like a white idol story because America loves that. You think about the history we were given as, I think about my K through 12 education. Yeah. George Washington's the first president. Abe Lincoln freed the slaves, even though Abe Lincoln, I think, was actually half black. I don't think he was the white savior they're trying to make him out to be. And Thomas Jefferson was like probably the OG of fetishizing black women, if I'm going to be real about it. Yeah. But that all jokes, even though I'm not really joking, all those kind of jokes aside, there's a whole other perspective. It's just the stories we were given were these white men, our founding fathers. For growing up, I thought Christopher Columbus was a hero when I was growing up. Because I grew up in the 90s. So to give anyone context, in the 90s, there's no internet, there's no nothing. We're just told like, wow, that's so cool. He discovered America. And then you get older and you start getting the facts. I'm like, oh, this motherfucker just got lost. And he thought he was in India. That's why he called them Indians, because he thought he had no sense of direction. I guess he was the start of the stereotype of men not wanting to ask for directions. If anything, that's what he discovered. But it's just interesting to me. I just think explore all aspects because we're only given, for the most part, one perspective. But there's so many other facets of our U.S. history that is not centered on white men. They're centered on people of many backgrounds. They touch on Martin Luther King, but we talk a lot more about George Washington. Like we didn't talk about Malcolm X at all. I learned about Malcolm X after high school, and even more about Muhammad Ali and what he did when he changed his name from Cassius Clay and all that stuff. And it wasn't even until maybe 5-6 years ago that I learned the name Wataru Misaka. Now, I say that name, you're kind of nodding, but I don't know if you know what that is. And most of the viewers and listeners probably have no idea who I'm talking about. In 1947, two things happened in sports. One big thing that everyone knows about is Jackie Robinson entered baseball and broke color barriers, went on to have a historic Hall of Fame career, and really set the tone and paved the way for other black athletes in baseball. Just like when Jesse Owens raced against Hitler's Nazis in the Olympics and broke down barriers. But another thing that happened in 1947 was a young man, a Japanese American named Wataru Misaka, was drafted by the New York Knicks. And he was the first non-white player in the NBA. And nobody talks about it.
No.
Nobody talks about it. And
they don't put his picture up in schools.
No. And, the first black player wasn't even until 1950, 3 years later, after Wataru Misaka. Now, he only lasted 3 games because, to give people context of what was going on, you're coming off the heels of World War II ending, Pearl Harbor, all that stuff. Do you really think a sport owned by white men was going to let a Japanese American coming off of the heels of World War II really shine? I never saw Wataru play. I would love to see footage. Yeah. But if he was good enough to make a team, I'm sure the dude could play some ball. But I don't think it would have mattered. But I guess my point is, not telling those stories is the same as erasing history.
And it's purposeful. Exactly. And that's the term that I always use when I get pushback by it. And I go, well, because it's purposeful that we don't know that, or it's purposeful that we don't have the conversation. And they don't want us to, because then that makes this huge amass of power that white men have accumulated feel very topsy-turvy, and then they get really nervous. And then when they get really nervous, they tend to, make it our problem. And when it comes to things like media, I very much understand it, because a lot of people have a lot of heart in the media that they produce and that they love. And a lot of people on the audience side have a lot of like sense memories to being a little kid and watching, or listening to records of Elvis or whatever. So I know a lot of heart goes into it, but you question the people that you're dating and are falling in love with. Why can't you question the king of rock and roll? What makes him any different? We have to start getting to this point where we're empathetic about the flaws that were allowed to happen in our country, to the point where we can understand them and have a conversation about it and move on.
Absolutely. And that's such a great point, Natalie, because when someone reaches an iconic status like an Elvis Presley or a Muhammad Ali or a Michael Jordan, a Tiger Woods,
Mm-hmm.
there tends to be a disconnect. We forget these are human beings underneath that iconic exterior. I know I was able to see Michael Jordan behind closed doors. I go to Bulls practices and everything. Look, he was just really a normal dude who could hoop really, really well. Don't get me wrong. He was extraordinary as a basketball player, but as a human, he was just a normal guy, really. And I was, even at the young age of 12, 13, when I met him, I was so like, I was definitely starstruck at the time because I'm young, but I was so amazed that he's just like a regular dude.
Yeah.
But he just happens to be able to be incredible at basketball. And that's really the case. And that's why I don't really get starstruck around celebrities or anything. It's just, I have admiration when someone achieves a certain level of excellence in their field, no matter what it is. But I also like to remind myself, these are still human beings with human emotions at the end of the day. And that also means that if they can do it, then you can find your way too. What that doesn't mean if you get Michael Jordan's personal trainer and coach, you're going to be Michael Jordan. But it just goes to show that you put your head down and do the work, your own sort of greatness is going to be bestowed upon you. I truly believe that. But I think when you're trying to chase something, that's when you're going to get yourself into trouble. But to the original point of, these are just human beings at the end of the day. Elvis was just a normal dude who knew how to move his hips, who knew how to entertain, and knew how to put on a show. I don't know anything about his personal life. I haven't seen the movie, admittedly. I'm a big Baz Luhrmann fan in terms of the visuals. That's why I watch a lot of Baz Luhrmann movies, because it's to look at the production design, the cinematography is really, it's almost like David LaChapelle. If David LaChapelle made a movie, like kind of the worlds that are built, it's very, very cool to see. But I think at the end of the day, we tend to mythologize certain people. I think that's okay if you're mythologizing their skill and their accolades, but I think just we got to remind ourselves, these are just people. They're just human beings, and I think some of those individuals should remember that they're only human beings too, because that works on both sides.
I am the person in my friend group who my friends shove in front of the person from TV or Broadway or wherever that they would like to talk to, because they know that I'll talk to them as if they were my checkout person at Target. I just like strike up a nice conversation with them and smile. And someone asked me why one time, and I go, I just feel like it would be really lonely to be doing these meet and greets and only be treated like a person who's almost like behind glass and no one can actually understand or get to know. I go, so I just talk to them like I would talk to you, because I kind of worry about what happens to your mental and emotional health once people stop talking to you like you're not the king of rock, like you're the king of rock and roll.
Yeah, especially when you sort of put all your eggs in that basket and you equate what you do with your personal identity. This is why, in my opinion, you see a lot of mental health, declining with a lot of these top celebrities. Because if you don't know who you are, and if you had anxiety before you became famous, you're still going to have anxiety when you're famous. Now, the difference is you got people paying attention to your Instagram. Maybe you're getting 10,000 likes on a post now, as opposed to maybe, the 25 likes you got the night before, because that's just how it can go. That's not natural for us as humans to go through. And, because that's all it takes. Like, basically what happens is one day, maybe the night before your movie premieres, to the broad audience, that part of the world's not looking at you, but once it's out there, a whole world that wasn't looking at you is all of a sudden all eyes on you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know who you are, that can be a very dangerous path
Yeah.
to go down. I'm lucky enough where I got humbled in college because I was a college athlete and I thought I was destined for the pros and gonna become a superstar there and break all sorts of barriers in that sense. It didn't happen, but I got a slight touch of what it's kind of like to be a celebrity then, because you're a college athlete in a college town. You're treated like a rock star. And I'll admit, I had a lot of fun with that. And it was the first time in my life that I got that sort of validation. But once it was gone, just like that validation, being, all the free shit you were getting, whatever benefits we would get, completely gone. And it was a lesson. I didn't realize it in at that time, but looking back, I realized that's what was preparing me for maybe where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
Should I get to that level of being more of a public figure and deemed whatever, I'm going to be ready for it because I just know who I am at the end of the
Yeah.
day. A lot of times you get these icons and it's great when they're surrounded by people. It's great when they're on the red carpet. It's those quiet moments alone
Yeah.
where they have a lot of trouble. And that's why, in my opinion, again, that's why you see a lot of these entourages. You see these posses
Yeah.
because these individuals are afraid to be alone because then that means they got to face themselves. But
Yeah.
that sort of thing is the best thing anyone can do. It's going to be uncomfortable. I've been there. It sucks. I avoided it for many years, but the moment you just kind of face that and figure that shit out,
Mm.
you're going to be ready for whatever comes next, and any of that praise is always temporary. We hope it can last forever. Even you can win the Super Bowl, pulling that Monday after Super Bowl Sunday, and it's just another Monday.
Right.
You're still a Super Bowl champ,
It's
but the
December
job
26th.
yeah.
Like, or it's like, honestly, like Christmas gets boring to me around like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, we waited all year for Christmas and Christmas is really fun right up until December 25th. And like, now it's time to plan out when we're taking the tree down and the lights and all of it.
Yeah, and it's those lines are getting even more blurred because I swear Christmas decorations and music are coming earlier and earlier every year. It's like at least let Halloween pass before you start putting that shit on us. But it's just that's a great analogy though, Natalie. That December 26th, because on the one hand, me as a competitor, I'm always aware that you're only considered a success when you perform a successful task.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be considered a winner, you got to do it again and again and again. That's why it's so hard to be a winner. That's why as an athlete, I admire Michael Jordan because he was just a winner.
Mm-hmm.
Kobe Bryant was just a winner and they did it over and over again. I don't know them well enough as people to kind of speak on that, so I won't, but I admire that. But that's a realization of that's very hard to do. And that's why there's so few that have done it.
Yeah.
But also, so I keep that in mind, but I also keep in mind that it's not forever. At some point, it's going to end. Whenever I have that moment, if I'm on the Dolby Theater stage accepting my Academy Award,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just know this is a moment. It's a great one. I'm going to absorb it, but tomorrow's Monday.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back and do my thing and walk my dog.
You're going to have to return the tux. Like, and you're probably going to have to run that errand yourself. I hate running errands. But my humbling moment,
I'd love to hear yours.
Oh, we recently rediscovered it, my best friend Stephanie and I, from childhood. I was 17. We were all working at McDonald's and we decided to throw a McIdol, like American Idol, but in the lobby of McDonald's.
Okay.
And it was going to be a competition. And I entered. And that's when I was faced with the realization that I sing every day, but I'm not good at it.
What did you sing?
I sang the Chicks, There's Your Trouble. I sang a country song.
Oh, the group formerly known as the Dixie Chicks.
Yes. Yeah. I sang that song. My mom, hot mom, as we refer to her on this podcast, and now she knows that, so I'm just going to keep doing it. She would peek her head in and be like, now remember what Simon tells those people who are screaming more than they're singing or trying to act out the song more than they're singing. Like, she was trying to set me up for my fall, and I was just like, no, I've got it. I got it. It's going to be so good. I got all of my coworkers amped just to figure out that day that I cannot sing.
Well, I think you're I haven't heard it. I haven't heard you sing. Maybe one day we'll have that moment. But so what's the if you don't mind me asking, what's going through your mind at that time, and what was the aftermath like? How did you come to terms with that, and how did you deal with it once that was over?
So, you talked a lot about how when these people sit alone with themselves, they don't really know themselves. And that
Mhm.
sums up my teen years. I spent a lot of my teen years being whoever the person an arm's length away from me wanted me to be in the moment. I'm now in what I call recovery for codependency, but it still flares up.
We're all in that boat now. You're not alone, Natalie. I'm there with you. Yep.
And actually, my homework is to stop. My therapy homework recently has been when you're having a conversation with someone, don't turn it into a bit for their enjoyment. Why don't you see if they'll do something like that you too would enjoy and just have like a back and forth moment. So, I guess after McIdol, because I also had to work a shift afterwards. Like I got to compete and then I had to like put on the McDonald's stiff shirt and get to drive through. So you're kind of just down and more quiet than normal. And people are coming up and they're like, you did a really good job. And I was like, he cut me off after 15 seconds. We know what that means on American Idol.
Right.
And you're just grappling with that. And honestly, John, if you really wanted to hear me sing, I sing on every episode of Still Comfy. I sang all of Elvis's hits while we were talking about him. And on Monday, we did Now and Then. And I sang that entire soundtrack because it's also one of my comfort soundtracks.
That
But
the Sophie B. Hawkins song is in that movie, right? The As I Lay Me Down, Now and Then. Is that
yeah,
all right? Okay.
yeah. My favorite is Band of Gold.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad to hear your love of just kind of singing for fun wasn't taken away from that.
Yeah.
That's what I
Well,
get out of that.
luckily, I have a very wonderful great aunt who loves to remind me how wonderful I am. I have a card that I need to sit down and like write another letter to because we're pen pals. And she couldn't make it past the Hallmark line. Like she had just told me, like, just remember how much you're loved. And then it says, like, it's just a printed card that says, wishing you well today or whatever it says. And she circled it and then put ... because I love you so much. And I was like, damn, we all need a great aunt like that who can't even make it past the Hallmark line
Mhm.
without telling you one more time that they love you.
It's true. I mean, it's always nice to have that reminder, even though I always just encourage people to say it.
Yeah.
It may be understood and we kind of know, but as I get older and having, been through certain losses, friends, family members, you realize, tomorrow's not promised.
Yeah.
So if you have that opportunity to express that sort of love to somebody verbally or on paper, sometimes it's tough for people to say it out loud. And I get
Mm-hmm.
that I was like that for a long time. I would always just encourage people to take that opportunity because I'm someone that doesn't believe in regrets. I really don't. I do think certain things are meant to be done for you to learn from it on a future in the future. But at the same time, people you can regret those things if you don't
Yeah.
say what you mean. So I would just always encourage people when you have that opportunity of anything, when you see that window, definitely take it.
Yeah. So my great aunt, she, from the time I was very little, because my mother's side of the family is Croatian. So if there was a jukebox, we threw money into it. And if the food took like a minute too long to get from the kitchen to the table, my great aunts would move chairs and be like, we're going to dance to the song. And then you were dancing in the restaurant. Um, so I would get up and I would dance with my aunts. And my aunt would always tell me that one. She was born with the music in her. So every time I sing, I'm like, it's because it would be so disappointing to my great aunt to know that I lost my love of music and I let the music get out of me because I'm not Britney Spears.
You know what? And even Britney Spears isn't, like, may not even be Britney Spears anymore. She's a
Right.
different version of Britney Spears at this point, and I hope we get to see what exactly that means because growing up and witnessing her fame in real time, and I think we're relatively close in age.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that, I'm like, I think about where I was at age 17.
Yeah.
If I were to have to deal with all that scrutiny and bullshit, and Justin Timberlake somehow didn't get any of the
At
heat,
all.
which goes to show white man privilege. I mean, let me just be real with it. I don't know Justin, never met him, never looked him in the eye, never shook hands. I'm not going to speak on him as a person. The fact is, he didn't get any heat,
Right.
at least not from the mainstream media. I'm sure behind the scenes, people were saying stuff, but those sort of things are whispered, whereas the mainstream media has the capability to be on the podium with the megahorn so
Yeah.
everybody can hear. But yeah, I definitely take a more empathetic approach with that sort of thing. But back to you, I'm really glad something like that, Natalie, and I've seen it happen, and this makes me like really admire you for this, is that you didn't let it, like, it's a very mature take for you to think of your great aunt
Yeah.
and to not let your joy of it be taken away. Because I'll admit it, maybe at 17, if that were to happen to me, I probably wouldn't have even gone near it. So I'm really glad to hear that your love of singing wasn't taken away from that, because unfortunately it's not always the case. So you're one of the, I feel like you're one of the 1% when it comes to that. So I thought
I
I'd throw that
finally
at you.
made it. I'm the
I
one
mean, you're making
percent.
we're look, we're here, we're alive, we've made it. We're part of we're all part of a 1% when you think about it. But I just think that's really cool. I didn't know that about
Yeah.
you. I knew, we've gotten, I think, bits and pieces through segmented conversations with
Yeah.
each other through text messaging or through Instagram. But that's a cool story, and I hope people really take that to heart, because that sort of thing can ruin somebody. I
Yeah.
talk about Kobe
Yeah.
Bryant all the time. Kobe Bryant in his rookie year against the Jazz shot 4 air balls,
Hmm.
and that could have ruined him. We could have maybe not had Kobe Bryant as we knew him today, but what he did was he sat down and asked himself, "Why did I shoot 4 air balls?" And he figured it out. He said, "I came from high school where the most amount of games we would play is maybe 35 games. This is an 82 regular season plus
Hmm.
the playoffs." Like, he's like, I didn't have the legs. So I knew I had to get my legs underneath me to make sure it never happened again. And guess what? It never happened again. But so I feel like you're in that group of the Mamba mentality in a different respect. But I just think that's great that you just took ownership and went, okay, it didn't go the way I wanted,
Hmm.
but it's not going to ruin my love for music. That's really cool.
Jump to now in my 30s. So while I didn't give up singing because I was like, people won't listen to me if they don't want to, I did give up art. As soon as I learned that I couldn't draw, I stopped. Like, and I think what the average person forgets is you just don't. And I think it's that winner mentality that you were talking about. Like, you have to keep winning and you have to keep doing that, and everything has to be a win. It's very capitalistic, which is another one of our enemies on this podcast. But it's, if you're not good at it, my best friend and I talk about this all the time, how growing up our mindset was, if you're not good at it, why would you do it? And that was art for me. And then while I was putting together what this show was going to be about, I was also doing the Artist Way, which is a 12-week program where you kind of rediscover your artist. And what I realized is, well, I get to determine the parameter of skill that I could have in anything, because it's not how much talent do you have. I mean, that goes into it, but it also goes, we need to start asking kids, like, how much time do you want to put into that to be good at it and gauge their interest that way?
Yeah, I think so. And if there is someone who wants to achieve a certain level of excellence, then be straight up with them and go, it's going to take work and it's going to take time. So just really be sure this is what you want to do. But also, I have that mentality as well, where I used to be like, if I'm not good at it, what's the point? Now it's more shifted to, you're going to get my best no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to anything I create, or whether it's a podcast or anything, with this podcast in particular, or like with Real Psychology, I go in just with the mindset of, if someone's going to take an hour or two out of their day to listen to me talk,
Mm-hmm.
I have a responsibility to give my best. Now, if my best doesn't line up with what they view as quote good or not, that's out of my control. But as long as we're putting that effort in,
Yeah.
those things are going to line up. And I think that's important for people to remember, is, me being a filmmaker, knowing that if I make a TV show or I make a film and people are going to take time to watch it, how dare I, if I didn't give my best, then it's like, how dare you? That's
Yeah.
kind of my mentality. Like, give your best. But also, while you're here, it's like Larry Bird would say, like, while you're here, you might as well win, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't, it's not the end of the world. It ain't that deep. You can always learn from it, and that's a win right there as well.
Luckily, when I was teaching in the first school, the man who later became my dear friend, who was running the junior high drama club, his partner, like in the drama club, his co-director dropped out, like said, like, me and my family don't have time for this, whatever. And then my roommate at the time was like, you should really help him because, like, that's a lot and he'll try to do it by himself. And, like, you're a first year teacher. Like, they look to the young people to get involved with anything. So I told him, I was like, I remember it was like the night, it was like the back to school party. There was a bonfire. And I told him, I was like, listen, never been on a stage, seen a lot of plays. I go, can't sing, love to. I don't sew, and I've never built anything. But if you just need someone to show up and help you, like, get kids engaged, I'll help you out the entire season. And after that first season, I asked him, I go, do you want me back next season? Because the other co-director had ended up mid-season joining us again. And he was like, yeah, because you know what? You told me that you knew nothing about this. When you offered to help me out, you were like, I'm literally going to help you herd cats. He goes, but every day you showed up and you got better. So that's my mindset. Every day I'm like, okay, every day you have to show up and you got to be a little bit better than you were yesterday.
I mean that's it's a great sort of attitude to have, because that every day we get to wake up again. If we get to wake up tomorrow morning, that's an opportunity to kind of improve on what we did in the past, and the day before and the day before that. And in Korea, there's something known as hwangap, because in Korea, they consider the age of 65 one full life cycle. So if you make it to your 65th birthday, that's considered you completed one life cycle. And
Mm-hmm.
that second afterlife is hwangap, which is you're taking the wisdom of the first 65 years and applying it to your next chapter. And when you do that, I don't think, I feel like it's no mistake. You see a lot of Koreans and Asians who look very youthful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's all mindset. My mom is 73, but she doesn't look 73. I think she's someone who really embraced Hwanga, because she was taking the lessons and everything we went through for the first 65 years. And I've seen it. She has a weight lifted from her. She just kind of figured life out.
Yeah.
And I'm watching her and I'm learning from that, where, I feel like we've all had previous lives. And my whole thing is I can't change that. But what can I do today to just be better? And then
Yeah.
what can I do tomorrow to be better than that? And it doesn't even have to be huge leaps and bounds. Even if
Mm-hmm.
you're going a millimeter, it's like The Alchemist. The Alchemist was all about recognizing how far you've come, even if you haven't reached the finish line, whatever that finish line may be. I think it's always important to reflect on the journey thus far, but also stay and also keep that ambition to keep on getting better. It's finding that balance. It's the yin yang,
Yeah.
and any listeners and viewers, please note that I say yin yang, not yin and yang,
Yeah.
because while they are different ends of the spectrum, they need each other in
Mm-hmm.
order for it to work. Just like you got the hot and the cold on your water faucet.
Yeah.
If you don't have one or the other, you can't get lukewarm, you can't get cool water. You need the extremes of the hot and the cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that to be true in life as well. You need the extremes of all these things on one end of the spectrum to the other, emotionality and all that stuff. Recognize both sides and then find that balance that works for you. There's no universal balance.
Yeah.
There's guidelines and there's examples that are out there, but the actual implementation has to come from you and you alone. And ultimately, you're going to know what works for you. And I think, as I hope one day we can sort of destigmatize this or just like debunk this, but I'm speaking particularly about entertainment right now. I feel like Hollywood very much has parallels to high school in terms
Mm-hmm.
of social status and hierarchy, where you think about, and it's portrayed on TV, and I've seen it in real life, anyone who's a little different, anyone who just wants to be an individual, who's not doing what the the norms are, the majority is doing, you're punished for it. Where same thing in entertainment. When you look really closely, and people are trying to say there's more opportunities for people of color and women, like, let's look really closely at the examples they're giving. They're kind of feeding us this certain narrative. So I just yeah, there's so much to unpack there, but and I'm almost kind of getting lost in my own thought. But I always just say, like, you got to do what's right for you. And it's ironic in Hollywood because everyone's always saying we need something original,
Mm-hmm.
but then the moment you're original and you're not falling into this paint by numbers sort of mentality
Right.
that the machine that runs Hollywood likes to do, you're kind of punished for it and you're ostracized and you're kind of dismissed.
Right.
Where different isn't always bad, it's not always good either. But I think just I hope that anyone listening, and I know it's easier said than done, I may be oversimplifying, but if you ultimately know that this is the path you want to take, and if it's a little different, lean into it,
Mm-hmm.
try it out. It may work for you, may not, but that's all part of it. Show me one baseball player in the Hall of Fame that didn't strike out a few times.
Right.
They all went for it. But it didn't mean that they didn't make it to the Hall of Fame. Didn't mean that they didn't get these accolades. It's just sometimes you just got to go for it. Michael Jordan missed plenty of game-winning shots. So did Kobe. So did Magic Johnson. So did all the greats to ever do anything great in their sport. They've all swung and missed. Spielberg had 1941 after I think Close Encounters, which completely bombed at the box office.
Mm-hmm.
He still kept going, and you had McIdol, which didn't go the way you wanted, and you're still going. You still have that love for music, and I keep highlighting that because I'm telling, like, I've been in similar situations where I wouldn't even go near something if I
Mm-hmm.
experienced something like that. So I really commend you for that.
Thank you.
For that mentality. Yeah.
It's a funny little story that, again, my best friend and I, because she's like, I didn't know, Natalie, that you really thought that you could be a pop star. I go, well, you can convince yourself anything when you're singing the entire Grease soundtrack to your stuffed animals every day. Like, you can convince yourself you're headed to Broadway until you're 17 years old and doing it in front of people who can hear you. And you're like, oh, this is what I sound like.
I mean, this is also before auto tune as well. So
Yeah.
who knows what could have happened if I.
I will tell you that Michael Jordan in the 90s Chicago Bulls was possibly, it's not the last time I cared about sports. It was the first time I cared about sports. And then the next time was one of the seasons when the Chicago Blackhawks were going to win the Stanley Cup. And I was just like all in because I love hockey. Hockey is the only sport that you can really get me amped about.
Yeah, I remember that. What was that? 2012, 2013?
Yeah.
That time? Yeah, I remember that. I
Because
remember
I
that
had
was a
just
big deal.
graduated college and I was so because I grew up near St. Louis watching the St. Louis Blues
Oh, wow.
hockey team. So now I'm trying to see if I can go to Columbus and see the Blues play there. But we're rounding on an hour, and you were really gracious to give me an hour of your time this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and move into our final stage of the episode. Okay. But know that if there was something that you didn't get to talk on because we went in a lot of different directions today, you are always welcome back. Once you're on Team Tolerator and you want to talk about something, you have an open invitation.
All right, bet. I appreciate that. I would love to come back sometime. There's always something to be discussed, and I think we'll know when the right time will be.
I would love to talk to you about gaming because I did an episode about gaming from women's perspectives because sometimes it becomes a very volatile environment for us. But I would love to talk to someone else about that so I can stop being mad at Critical Role fans for being mean to Marisha Ray. Like, I would just like to let it go.
Oh, I don't know all the details of that, so you'll have to kind of off book inform me because I obviously know the Critical Role team and know of them and what they've done, but I don't know I don't know what you're talking about, so we'll talk about that.
The Critical Role people are my comfort people, and when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons on Sunday, I texted my DM afterwards. I was like, you made me do a full Liam O'Brien today. I did the sad face. I wistfully cried as my character. All of it. She goes, oh, did I? I was like, yeah. I go, and no one could see me because we play digitally. But I did the full Liam. And she's like, are you okay now? I go, yeah, just had to put some cold water on my face.
Well, that's good. That means y'all did it right because you should be invested. I've never done a campaign where I wasn't completely emotionally invested. within like 3 rounds.
Yeah.
Once you're into it, it's into it. And that's the beauty of role playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, and why I've played them since I was a kid in the late '80s.
Yeah. So one thing that we like to do on the podcast is we like to leave our listeners with an overlapping lesson. It can come from the conversation. It can come from our careers or what we've had to kind of carry with us through life as we deal with things like misogyny and capitalism and the patriarchy. So if there was one thing that you would like to remind people of, what would you remind them of?
I'll keep it. God, there's so many things I could go off on. So I'll keep it kind of within the theme of what we were talking about today with identity
Mm-hmm.
and owning yourself and really taking a close look at oneself,
Yeah.
which can be a really scary thing. A lot of times in my industry, and I think in general, a lot of times people want to bestow a title of they're the next somebody
Mm-hmm.
coming up. They're the next this. And I used to strive to have a title like that. I was like, I hope when I start getting clout, people call me the next Spielberg or whatever.
Yeah.
And it comes to a point where I just totally ditched that mentality because I was like, why would I want to be the next something when I'm already the first and only me? They like the people are praising these people because they got their platforms to really shine
Mm-hmm.
and show what they can do. I just haven't gotten there yet on like on a scale as maybe others have. But I would just always encourage people. Look, you can have an acknowledgement. There's people who set examples, and if something you do will remind somebody of somebody else's achievement, there's nothing wrong with that. But don't try to pursue that. I don't think you should, in my opinion, I don't think you should do things with the mentality of being the next somebody. That person's already done it. You can't be the next Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan already did it.
Right.
And there were never going to be a next Michael Jordan because there's only one Michael Jordan that at least
Right.
played basketball for the Chicago Bulls. I know
And
it's a
he got
common
the
name.
Netflix documentary and all of it.
Exactly. So going back to what I said earlier on this episode, where it's just don't try to be the next anybody
Right.
because you already are the first and only you. You're one of one,
Yeah.
original you. And when you put your head down and you really do the work and you do the grind, everything that's necessary to really better your craft, whatever it may be, I that sort of greatness, whatever you're trying to achieve, it's gonna find you
Yeah.
because you're doing the work. It's gonna naturally find you and it's gonna be bestowed upon you. But when your only focus is to try to emulate someone else who has been successful, you're just gonna be at best a very cheap imitation, and
Right.
imitation is very pale. It's not great. Then there's being original, and being an original can be scary because sometimes it's against what everybody else is doing. But think about it. There's roads that are paved. You got the lanes painted on and everything. There I got the asphalt on there. But there's also these other dirt roads in these fields. Those are just
Mm-hmm.
roads that haven't been paved yet.
Right.
So who's to say you can't pave your own and carve your own path?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would encourage people to do is like really take ownership of who you are. And you can acknowledge that maybe something you do in your field could be reflective or like remind people of one of your predecessors. But my whole approach is don't try to be the next anybody because you're already the first and only you.
Yeah.
And as a comic book collector, we always strive for the limited edition one of
Mm-hmm.
one. Well, us as individuals, that's the most limited edition as it can get.
Yeah.
So really own that and just know that nobody can take that away from you except you.
Yeah. I'm going to remind the listeners, and it's a big theme this week in everything I'm recording and doing, that I truly believe that empathy is the actual solution. So when it comes to the people that you admire or the television or the movies, and then someone asks you a really tough question that you don't want to answer because you were living in the comfort and the glow of loving the thing, it's fine, but have a little empathy that Michael Jordan gets to be flawed. So does Michael Jackson and Elvis. I get to be flawed because if they get to be flawed, we get to be flawed too, as as the people not on the silver screen. Like everyone gets to be flawed, and it's okay. And I'm gonna piggyback off of yours because
Sure.
instead of trying to be the next Michael Jordan, when I think of myself, I go, I don't want to be the next Whitney Cummings. I want to be the next person that Whitney Cummings wants to hang out with and take on tour. I want to be the person who makes Whitney Cummings laugh. And you're not going to do that just shelling out her jokes.
Because she's already heard it in her
Right.
own head.
Because she wrote them and she had to tell them for an entire year.
That's a great way to put it. So it's just like own ourselves and the right things will fall into place. So do the work, everybody. That's what I always believe in. Do the work and the rest will follow.
And then we leave kind of a positive manifestation for just the general universe, something that we wish would happen going forward.
Oh, I mean, look.
I know it's 2022. Why did I decide to put manifestation at the end of my 2022 podcast?
I'll keep it kind of on brand, quote unquote, with what I do with Fireside and everything, which is I hope everybody can find some sort of clarity with their mental health and really embrace their mental health and not be afraid to have those conversations. That's especially true in communities of color, where you have these historical barriers and stigmas to not talk about our mental health, especially among men. That's why I love it was like season 2, episode 8 of Ted Lasso, when Ted and Coach Beard and Nate and Roy and Higgins are all talking about their vulnerabilities. And I don't know if I've ever seen that on a television show where men were so open about their mental health. I'm sure it's happened before, but not to the degree that I at least saw on Ted Lasso. But that I guess my manifestation would have to be, I hope you all take a chance to really take care of yourselves. It's like in the airplane safety video, secure your oxygen mask before you help others. Because if you don't help yourself, you can't help others. Just like if you can't love yourself, it's going to be it's going to be more difficult to really truly love someone else. Because if you can't let yourself in and you have these boundaries up with yourself, that's going to be externalized towards others. So I would just manifest, talk about it, be about it, and know that you're not alone with it. I just hope that everyone can internally know that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And once you admit that, and going back to what you're saying, Natalie, with flaws, I mean, that's the good stuff. It's like in Good Will Hunting when Robin Williams is talking about his wife, and he's like, people call these things flaws, but that's the good stuff. That's what made her my wife. This is what makes us. This is what makes your best friend. It's not only the good stuff. If you're going to take in the good, you got to take in the bad. But if I'm going to manifest anything, I would just hope more and more people would really be willing to take a good look at their own psyche, their own mental health, because that is something we should know the best. But unfortunately, it's the thing we know least about for the most part, and we should change that.
I think I'm going to manifest that people keep singing or writing or painting or drawing, even if you have all of these comparisons from other people in your head, and that I hope that you allow yourself the allowances to make that easier for you to do for yourself. The only reason I started painting again is because I went and took a watercolor class, and I realized that no one yells at you if you trace the thing that you want to paint before you paint. No one's going to yell at you. It's actually a tool. And somewhere along the line, I got it into my head that if I had to use a tool to make something easy, it was because I wasn't good at it.
Which is not the case. We all have our own way of doing things. There's multiple ways up the mountaintop. Some people can climb up with their bare feet. Some people need the hiking pole. Some people maybe just skip all that and take a helicopter up. Whatever way is your way. Whatever way you choose is your way. And it may not line up with others, but that doesn't make it wrong. Okay, I can't unilaterally say that. Sometimes I'll just leave it at that. But that's a great way to put it. And I'm glad you've gotten back into your painting and watercolors, because I know earlier you had said you kind of stepped away from art. So I'm glad you're taking ownership of that. Now I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you. I had a lovely time on this episode. Thank you so much again I know I keep thanking you for your time, but time is valuable and time is income. So I'm very happy to have gotten to sit down with you one more time to have a conversation.
Well, thank you as well. When you say time is income, health is wealth. And I say, if health is wealth, then mental health is $1 trillion bill. And I felt like this was good. This was a good conversation to have. And this does supplement my mental health. And hopefully it does for you too.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. I always tell people, I was like, this was a very healing conversation. Thank you. I'm now going to go journal about it.
Good.
Go ahead and tell all of the tolerators where they can reach out to you if they would like to get in touch with you and your work.
Oh, sure. It's just my name, Jon Lee Brody, across the board. John with no H. I'll know I've made it in this industry when I don't have to remind people there's no H in my name.
Oh, there you go.
That's just one of the, because I always had to give even when I'm at Starbucks and I'm like, what's your name? Like, John, no H. And half the time they're not listening, but
Yeah.
it's Jon Lee Brody, John with no H, all across the board, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, also fireside chat / Jon Lee Brody. And Real Psychology is on Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we discuss the mental health of fictional characters and use that to parlay into an overall discussion of mental health to destigmatize such conversations, which, mental health is I would say, even a bigger passion than filmmaking. And if you know me, you know how much I love filmmaking, but like we said, health is wealth, and I want to make sure everybody has that $1 trillion bill in their wallets.
Yeah, I love Real Psychology because I'm always the person thinking deeply about the movie and not having anyone to talk to about it until now, because now I do Still Comfy once a week. But it's a really great reminder of how my friend Jules always says it's easier to learn from fiction than it is to learn from what's going on around us, because we can take a step back from it and really analyze it and see it from all angles. And I think that Real Psychology does a really good job of that.
Thank you. And we're really just getting started too. We I will say we got some pretty cool guests lined up for future episodes that I think people are going to enjoy. But most of all, hope you all keep listening to All the Men I Tolerated Before, and I hope you become bigger than like Dak Shepard's podcast and any of those top podcasts. Yeah, I in the sense that I feel like people can get real value out of your podcast. You're very open, you're very honest, and I don't feel like you're putting on a facade, which I'm not saying that others are. To some degree they are, because I think we all do, but I think authenticity like yours should be recognized on a bigger scale. So, there's my second manifestation, that sort of thing would be recognized on a grander scale, and I'm sure it's coming for you because you're doing the work, you're doing it, it's happening. That sort of greatness is going to be bestowed upon you sooner than later. So I'll just throw that at you before we go.
Oh my gosh! Well, thank you. I'm still going to do my cheesy throwaway line and remind the tolerators to follow us at Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram. That's how you get to watch Still Comfy. And I need you all to know that rewatching One Tree Hill has been the thing that saved me this summer. It's so much fun.
Where are you in the rewatch? Because I used to rewatch that every year. So where are you in the rewatch? So I know we're supposed to go, but you brought up One Tree Hill and I had to ask.
On Tuesday, we did 13, 14, 15. So today I have to watch 16, 17, 18 of season 1.
Oh, season 1. Okay, so you're still really early. Oh, wow.
And my friend Jules has never watched it before, so she gets to come in blind. She keeps asking me if Dan Scott is ever going to be a nice man. And I go, no. He's not. It's not.
Well, have you watched the whole? I don't want to spoil anything.
I watched all of it, yeah. And I do know eventually there's one person on that show who really wants him to be a good man.
Yeah, I mean they wrapped. I'll just say this because like there probably are people who haven't watched the show. They do wrap up, I feel, everyone's story pretty well, except for Chad Michael Murray. But I think there's more stuff going on behind the scenes to make that happen. But even him, they found a way to kind of wrap it. One Tree Hill was definitely something that ran parallel with my own life, college wise, and season 2 was one of the toughest to watch because I was going through something similar to what Nathan was going through at that time. So maybe, that's another conversation we can have. So that's why I was curious where you're at, because season 2.
I'm not a chronic rewatcher because my mindset is always there's so much content and I'll never get to it all. So how do I give the time to rewatch One Tree Hill? But it's so fun.
I will say this about rewatching shows that we grew up with. I think because our original mindset when we saw it, whether it's like a Boy Meets World, Friday Night Lights, One Tree Hill, whatever, where we were then mentally is not where we are now. So I think we do get to self-reflect in terms of how we viewed something. I watch Entourage now with a totally different mindset because when I first started watching, I was just starting this industry and I was very hooked on the wish fulfillment element of that show. Like, I want a big house like Vince Chase, and I want the car. Now I'm recognizing like the writing is really sharp, and like I love the friendship between the four guys.
Yeah.
And so I will say that about rewatching. When you rewatch something that you rewatched in your youth,
Yeah.
I think there's value in that. People think like Tony Robbins won't like that, but whatever. He can have his own opinions. He thinks people shouldn't rewatch shows, but I think there's value in that, and I think it's a good way to check out, but also recognize how far we've come mentally.
So this is the first time I've ever focused on Deb and Karen and their wonderful dynamic in season 1. And they're actually the inspiration for my new saying, empathy is the solution. We should try it, because they're so empathetic with one another about this shitty situation that Dan put them into. And they end up being really great friends. And you don't really get to see that a lot in TV. Just like two women who had this man kind of pin them against one another, and they came together and rose above it. And Deb did that from the very first moment she was on screen.
She sure did. Yeah. But for the record, that show is white as fuck.
It is. I know. I'm the one who said it this week. Don't make no. Now my white fragility is going to kick in. Because on still,
you gotta remember this is early 2000s too.
Yeah.
There was not talk of diversity or inclusion like there is now, and now we still got a ways to go, but
it's white as hell, and it's about basketball, which is
it is, but it's not. You know what I mean? Though, but that's cool, because you said Once You're Hill, and I kind of latched onto that because I used to rewatch that every year just for whatever sentimental nostalgic reason. So glad to hear that. That's still a thing amongst people.
Yeah, no, I love it. I sing the theme song to the chagrin of my cat every episode. I refuse to skip it.
I don't want to
be anything other than what I've been. Yeah. We do a drinking game on how many times I sing it live on the internet just in the middle of the show. But I'm still going to do my cheesy takeaway line, because what if people are as attached to it as I am? And remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including a world that wants to make you kind of feel lonely and shitty if you're grappling with hard stuff. Smiles are for joy. Hey everyone, it's Natalie, and I'm just here real quick to tell you that To All the Men I've Tolerated Before officially has merchandise. So if you're looking for a really great way to support the show and get our name out there so everyone can be on Team Tolerator, consider following the link in our show notes or in the bio of our Instagram at Men I've Tolerated Pod, so you can buy one of our title tees or see some of our holiday lines, like our feminist spooky line that includes t-shirts like Misogyny is Monstrous or My Past Relationships Still Haunt Me, with a beautiful haunted house on it. Happy spooky season, have a great day, and go shopping and treat yourself. You deserve it.